In a previous RailsCast, I talked about refactoring and how you can use it to remove duplication. I showed you how to extract a method from the view into the model, and this removed some duplication and cleaned up the view quite a bit. But I'm still not fully satisfied with this model, and I think we can improve it further. But before I do that, I want to focus on testing. Testing goes hand in hand with refactoring because while you're refactoring, you're trying not to change the behavior of the application. This means if you have good test coverage, you can easily make sure that you don't change the behavior. So before we start changing this full name method, let's add a test to make sure that it acts the way we want it to. We go to the user test file, and let's create a new test. Let's call it test full name without middle initial. And let's make a user. And then add a test to make sure that the full name acts the way we want it to. So user.fullname should return that. Now for testing, I like to use autotest. This is a gem that you can install. Gem install Zentest, and it'll install autotest for you. And what I like about autotest is that the tests will run continuously in the background, so it's easy to pop back there and see if you broke anything. So far, all of our tests are passing, so that's great. Let's create another test to test with a middle initial. And then we want that period in there, make sure that's working. And you can see the tests automatically ran and they're passing. So now that we know that our method behaves the way we want it to, we can focus on refactoring this method. Now one thing I don't like about this method is that we're using a local variable to concatenate strings like this. This reminds me of my PHP days where I concatenated the output of tons of HTML strings and stuff. So I want to get rid of that. One way I like to get rid of that is by putting the variables in an array and then joining it. You can see I'll probably join it by a space. So let's make an array. And then we'll join it by a space. This probably won't work, but let's just try it. Our test will tell us exactly what fails. Going back to our auto test, we can see that one test fails because there's no period in the name. Another test fails because there's two spaces instead of one. Let's focus on the second failure first. Because the reason there's two spaces is that this middle initial is nil, and so while we're joining it, we're creating a space before and after the middle initial. So how we can avoid that is by calling compact on the array, which will remove all nil values. So it'll remove the nil values, then it'll join it. So it should end up being just first name and last name in the array after compact. So let's go back to our auto test, and good, that test is passing. Now we just need that period in there. We can try to meddle with that, but I think a better way to do it is actually create a new method. Let's call it middle initial with period. And then just return the middle initial. Let's wrap this in with the period, unless it's blank. Oh great, all of our tests are passing now. Now I think there's one more test I want to try, because we've tested if the middle initial doesn't exist, or if it does exist, but we never tested if it is a blank string. We've only tested nil. So let's try it with blank string. middle initial, let's call it blank with blank middle initial. And we don't want any middle initial to show up when it's a blank string. So let's try that. And just as I thought, we have a failing test. This is because of how we get our middle initial. So let's go back here. You can see our middle initial is generated unless the middle initial is nil. Now Rails adds actually another method to the core Ruby, which is blank. And this will check if it's an empty string or if it's a nil value. So I think if we do that, great. All of our tests are passing now. So you think I'm all done refactoring, but I'm not quite all done. I'm really satisfied with this user model. But now when we go back to our tests, I see some duplication. And I'm going to cover that in our next refactoring episode. I hope you enjoyed this RailsCast on refactoring. If you have any messy code that you aren't sure how to refactor, send it to feedback@railscasts.com, and I might refactor it in a future episode.